The questions that we're asking is, will the Manchester attack and President Trump's broader exposure to the world be a turning point in his presidency, as some have suggested? Dan Henninger writes this in the Wall Street Journal. Grasping at Trumpian straws is a fact of life, but I'm going to hazard not much more than a thought, which is that the president who left for Saudi Arabia last Friday will not be the same president who returns here this weekend. Dan joins us now on set. He's the deputy editorial page editor for the Wall Street Journal and a Fox News contributor. A lot's happened in the last few days, Dan.
A lot has happened in the past week. It's been extraordinary, Jenna. First, he goes over to Saudi Arabia and gives a speech in Riyadh in which they're forming a coalition of Arab nations, striking a large military relationship with the Saudis, and then goes up to Israel. And while he's in the midst of those trips in the Middle East, Manchester happens. And I think that for presidents, it's events like this, a confluence of these sorts of events, that can really change a president and a presidency. It's one thing to be the president, but it's another thing to understand the full weight and gravity of your office. And I think that that is what is happening to Donald Trump over there in Europe this week, just as it happened to George W. Bush with 9/11. I mean, I think he was a changed man after that. It happened with Jimmy Carter with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. And I think something like that transformative effect is taking place with Donald Trump in Europe this week.
I just want our viewers to know what they're also seeing on the screen as we're again watching NATO headquarters and the gathering of world leaders that represent countries that are a part of this NATO alliance. The big, beautiful building that you see behind them is a building that costs more than $1 billion. I just want to mention that, as the president mentioned in his speech, that he didn't even ask for the cost of that building, and he kind of set it aside because he was talking about the contributions some of these companies were making to NATO for defense and otherwise. Dan, we heard from Nicholas Burns on our air just shortly after the president spoke during America's Newsroom, and he said this was not necessarily the time and place for this. He didn't really appreciate some of what President Trump had to say. He liked other comments. Overall, what did you think of those direct comments to the NATO members at this time and place in the trip?
Well, I think you have to take it all in context. I mean, he is over there trying to enlist them, and Secretary General, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said earlier today that NATO is now going to join the formal alliance, the one to fight Islamic State. Now, this was a Trump campaign promise, and he is over there in conjunction with his national security team, Secretary of State Tillerson, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, and National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, who are undoubtedly the architects of this strategy. And I think the president is now in Brussels beginning to pull another piece of it into place, which is NATO. And the comments out of the NATO leadership are not about what he said about the cost of their building. They're saying that we now realize that we have to focus on a common enemy, which is Islamic State. So I think you're seeing the beginning of the building of a strategy here. And I would regard this week in the Middle East and Europe for President Trump as a huge win for him, a big victory. I think it has to be recognized as such.